And today we must also remember Anthony Ashby, who, blinded by grief at the death of his parents, took his own life. What he did was sinful in the eyes of God, but God is merciful. He will have taken this little boy into his kingdom, there to join the mother and father that he loved and missed so much.
What did you see? Tony? He's come to fetch me. But tell him how he's dead.
And he left a note saying, I can't stand it any longer. Please forgive me. They didn't find a body, did they, Miss Ashby?
What are you looking for?
Don't you know, Miss Ashby?
He's gone. You frightened him away. You frightened him away.
Hello, welcome to Movie Uppers. My name is Bob Sham.
My name is Angela.
The sounds you hear may be dogs, and it is Halloween Hump Fest all month long. And every Wednesday, we're calling it Hammer Horror Hump Day. And we talk about a different Hammer film, and some are more hard horror than others. We'll be talking about Frankenstein next week. For this one, we got a psychological horror thriller hybrid. I feel like some of these hybrid horror selections this month, especially this one, feels particular to like a throwback kind of horror, like the feeling, the mood, the sensation, the creepiness. This movie has a jump scare that is the first time in all the movies we're discussing that made me go, whoa.
Yeah.
So there is actually scary shit and real creepy shit. But we're talking about the film Paranoiac from 1963, directed by Freddie Francis. Freddie Francis, the last movie of his we discussed was, I believe, Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. He directed that one.
Love that one.
He's also a prominent cinematographer and was the cinematographer for some of David Lynch's early movies. Freddie Francis has a high-end movie reputation out there. He's definitely one of the more iconic fellows that's involved in the Hammer history here.
That's very cool.
And this is written by Josephine Tey, based on a book she had written, which was loosely based on a true story of some guy trying to pretend to be a dead guy in like the 19th century. Very loosely based, adapted by Jimmy Sangster, who did the screenplay, and it stars Janet Scott, our first introduction on the show to Janet Scott.
I want more.
Oliver Reed, Sheila Burrell, Alexander Davian, cinematography by Arthur Grant. Oliver Reed, in our discussion of the movie he was in last week, Night Creatures, that movie was like a day off for Oliver Reed, right?
Yeah.
He's just very chill. But in this one, he is playing a psychotic alcoholic, and he is chewing the screen.
I want another bottle of brandy.
He doesn't stop.
Don't you stand the man, get it!
Literally chewing the curtains.
He must have been exhausted. This is why he drank all the time, right?
He had to have been exhausted. He really drank all the time, right?
Yeah,
in real life, so he was probably really just drunk.
Yeah, he was known for being a party animal.
So there is no more brandy.
Why not?
The wine merchant. Something about an unpaid account, sir.
If you just reverse his character of Simon's overall personality to something a little more jovial and fun, then you probably have what is close to how Oliver Reed actually was. Though we don't know him that well.
Simon, but not insane.
If I may say so.
You may not, Williams. You may not say anything. And if you'll be so good, tomorrow you'll get me another dozen bottles of brandy.
Without settling your accounts, all right.
Don't argue with me, man! Get it! Get it!
Who is the paranoiac here? Set us up. What's going on here? What's up with poor Janet, Eleanor?
We open up on a church service where they are honoring the dead parents of Janet and Simon. And they also acknowledge that, so 11 years ago is when the parents died. They acknowledge that 8 years ago, they also had a brother who died named Tony. Janet turns at one point and looks towards the door and faints because she saw a man.
She thinks she saw her dead brother.
She doesn't say it yet, but yes, you know.
At this service, Simon, as played by Oliver Reed, again, I actually love Oliver Reed in this movie quite a bit. He's so fun to watch. He's playing the organ.
Which he's been playing since he was 15.
Was Oliver Reed really playing this organ? Because it wasn't very good.
He could have learned that song because he plays the same thing over and over.
It was playing it like there were like you've had some lessons, but you're not really very refined. That's what it sounded like. And he puts a cigarette out on the organ and puts the butt into the organ pipe, which I thought was a nice touch. But just to show that this guy Simon, he don't give a rip about a GD thing.
Yeah, and they get outside of the church. There's a nurse who we find out later is not really a nurse. And she is helping Janet into the car, and their aunt is there who has raised these two.
Right.
And the nurse is there for Janet. So you know immediately that she's being cared for some reason. Simon comes out, and the aunt says, "Did you see what happened? Why didn't you go to your sister?" And he was like, "She has an expensive nurse.
She's fucking crazy.
You want to go in the car with me, Auntie?" And then he speeds off in his sports car to go get drinky.
Simon wants Eleanor committed for being a crazy person so he can be a sole beneficiary for his parents' estate.
Because in 3 weeks.
But the parents who seem like they must have known their children very well, had an executor administer the funds from their estate.
Well, that's normal when kids are young.
So Simon can only get a certain amount. And Simon would truly, if he was able to access all the money, would have drunk or gambled it all away.
I think...
He really is a complete psychopath.
Yeah, based on timing, he's about 21. So that makes sense that it's some sort of time that they said the kids could have the money when they're all old enough.
When their brother died, he was about 15.
And it was 3 years after the parents died, so it was 8 years ago. And the brother was 15. Tony was 15.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think Simon was 13.
They never found his body, but he was alleged to have thrown himself off into the ocean.
And he left a note.
So Eleanor keeps seeing a guy from far away that looks like Tony. And she's like freaking the fuck out. We don't know that it's Tony. We've never seen Tony. As far as we know at this point, it's a ghost. Like she could just be seeing things.
She believes she's crazy because everyone's telling her she's crazy and she's seeing things. And she's so distraught and upset that she goes to that cliff.
This is also very much a Hitchcockian type story as well, right?
Oh, yes.
It's got a foot in the horror thrills like Psycho does, but also has a foot in like classic noir like Hitchcock kind of did, but also that gives it an homage to the early days of Hammer Productions. And the movie, this is the first Hammer discussion that is in black and white. And it completely benefits this particular story to be black and white. And also, one of the troubling things about the Hammer horror movies in color is that it doesn't seem like they always make it to that golden hour of the dusk. So when they have such a hard time with the nighttime shots on Hammer movies, everything can get real muddy. And it'll be like, it'll look like it's like 3 p.m, but they'll be like, oh, it's like 8 p.m.
So they did a thing in this one where she's constantly running outside in her very fancy pajamas, and she thinks she sees Tony, so she runs outside. The edges of the screen are darker.
Yeah.
They had like a filter so that
like the walls closing in.
Yeah,
or something.
And I wasn't sure if it was the night or her mind or both.
Well, we see the guy that she sees as her brother. We see him by himself walking along. Mm-hmm. And we're like, okay, so we're just seeing this character separate. So this is an actual person. And he walks up on the cliffs and he sees Eleanor about to throw herself off some rocks. And she climbed quite a ways down there. And she jumps. She fucking jumps. And then he goes down to rescue her, and it cuts to him carrying her wet. Like, she's so fucking lucky. There's 1,000 ways she could have died, and somehow she didn't.
And he got down there in time to save her, and she was unconscious?
So this guy, who looks like her late brother who's dead, walks up holding her, and the housekeeper opens the door and is like, whoa. And then everyone doesn't seem too surprised. Like, they seem like, what is going on here? I think, the aunt is immediately skeptical.
Well, the aunt immediately is like, you're not him. And Simon's immediately like, you're not him.
Simon is not immediately like that, because when he first encounters him...
Hey, you! Come here! Did you hear what I said?
Simon is the one that makes the most shocked expression upon seeing him.
That's right. He gets in his car and drives away.
So this guy really does look a lot like their brother.
Yeah, a ghost. It's like a ghost has come back.
And so now this guy is here, and they're they're grilling him, but Simon seems to be a little more accepting, at least at first, than the aunt does, which seems very suspicious.
It is, but Simon also, at the same time, makes everything a game.
Yeah.
And gets so irritated so quickly. At this point, we know that the nurse is not really a nurse and that Simon is fucking her and that Simon hired her to take care of Eleanor. And when she passed out in the church, he went to the nurse and said, "What'd you do to her? That was so great." And the nurse was like, "No, I didn't. She thinks she saw something. Like maybe she really is going crazy." But they were trying to make her crazy, and he hired this fake nurse.
They're really grilling this brother with some questions, and he seems to know the answers.
The attorney's there.
And the attorney, Simon, points this out.
You want it to be Tony, don't you?
Simon.
It's true, Aunt Harriet. Our Mr. Cosset doesn't particularly like me. Do you? Cosset.
Whether I like you or not has no bearing on what I have to do.
Doesn't it? Well, you'll excuse me if I don't stay to watch the farce, won't you?
Simon knows that the attorney, the executor, doesn't like him. So the attorney kind of wants this to be the real Tony because he thinks it's better for the future of the estate.
Because Simon's a fuck up.
And Simon knows this. So Simon's on his heels, but he's playing it as coy as he can, but everyone knows he's a drunk psychopath. And he's always drinking, and he screams so much. He's so extra in this movie.
And he runs out constantly. If he gets to a point where he can't stand it, he just leaves.
He even cuts their brake line in the car, and she almost backs off the cliff, and Tony barely rescues her. So Simon is actively trying to kill him, and they seem to know this as well. They have a good idea. Well, Tony goes to meet with the executor's son, and it comes to reveal that Tony is, of course, not really Tony.
Tony Ashby doesn't drink.
Tony Ashby doesn't. I do.
He's a guy that's been groomed by the executor's son because the son knew the family and knew everything about Tony. He grew up with the family and is able to give this fake Tony all this information in case that they're, grill him 1,000 times over.
He even fed some of the questions to his dad, suggesting, hey, ask this, because he knew he prepped him.
So we're in a very wild little scam here. And the guy who's pretending to be Tony, he doesn't seem like such a bad guy.
As soon as he meets them, he feels guilty.
And he's really catching feelings, too, with Eleanor. It doesn't say as much, but Eleanor might be catching feelings back, but she thinks that's her brother.
Before she almost runs off the cliff, they're having a picnic, and he kisses her hand at a point, and she's laughing, and very suddenly he says, "We should get back." Because I think he's uncomfortable because he knows how much he feels for her. And she's talking about how glad she is that he's there and how comfortable he makes her feel. And then she almost dies. They come home, and that is, I believe, the night that they kiss.
Well, they're in the bedroom, and the way it actually plays out, the way Janet Scott ends up casually rolling into it, it's pretty well done. Like how she just suddenly gets wrapped up in it. Well, but it starts out with like an innocent little peck, right?
Yeah, she's just kissing him goodnight. It's kiss on the mouth for goodnight.
And then she straight up finds her lips on his lips.
Absolutely. And then she freaks out and she runs upstairs because they're in the foyer because she's going to tell him goodnight and go to bed. She runs upstairs yelling, "Maybe I am crazy. I am crazy. You're my brother. I'm evil. I'm dirty. I'm bad. This is so bad."
Don't come near me! I'm like Simon! I'm mad! I'm insane! I'm dirty!
And that's when he gets her. She's literally losing it. And she's so good in this scene. And he grabs her and holds her and he's like, I'm not your brother.
Yeah.
It's a scam. And I don't want to do it anymore because I care about you.
She fell for him thinking that was her brother. She's a brother fucker. Remember in Game of Thrones when Cersei did the walk and people were yelling, "Brother fucker!"
Shame! Oh, shame! Shame! Shame!
She fell in love with him. He reminds her of her brother. She fell in love with him thinking that was her brother.
She
brother
did,
fucker.
but she didn't understand the feelings, which is also why she thought she was truly insane. Because the second she was like, oh shit, I love my brother, she was like, I'm actually crazy.
One things that have contributed to her feeling like she's insane is that she thinks that she can hear a young Tony singing from the church area, and with the organ playing like late at night, and her aunt and the rest of the family are gaslighting her, basically saying like, oh, you don't hear it. We don't hear anything, right? So at one point, Tony hears it and he goes to investigate. He sees someone playing the organ in a
big
cloak.
hood on, yeah.
And I was really hoping like the real ghost of the real Tony would show up.
I immediately was like, it's Tony.
I was kind of hoping that.
It looks like a little person, too.
But suddenly appearing in the doorway, a jump scare, someone wearing this creepy fucking mask.
Fucking scary as shit.
That whacks him over the head and tries to kill him, and he manages to survive.
Hooks him. It's like a hook.
Yeah, he gets stabbed, but I don't know why they didn't. It seemed like they could have just finished him off, but they didn't. It's like they freaked out and ran off.
And Eleanor takes care of him.
So he explains to her what he did, and she's like, oh, that was real? The organ, the singing child? I thought that was all in my head. They told me that was all in my head, and you heard that?
She wants to call the cops, and he says to her, no, I want to figure out what's going on first. And then he goes to the attorney's son, who set him all up to this, and basically warns him, you have about 12 hours before this whole thing blows to hell. So get your shit in order, because I'm not doing this anymore. He goes back home and he waits, and it happens again.
And this time he goes out there and he's watching from the window this time, and Eleanor comes and joins later, and he sees that Simon is playing the organ, and they see like the mask.
The person in the mask is kneeling beside Simon watching him play. It's fucking creepy.
And they realize that the voice of the young boy singing is a recording. Mm-hmm. So I guess they loved Tony's voice so much they put it on wax back in the day.
I guess so.
Very convenient. They see the person in the creepy mask, and they see Simon playing, and they see the record, so they know something's up here. So what happens after that?
So he tells Eleanor, stay, I'm going to go in and see. But then the person in the mask looks up and sees Eleanor in the window. So the person in the mask meets Tony at the door.
And it's revealed that the person in the mask is the aunt, which we pretty much knew at that point.
Yeah, we pretty much knew. But it's just so insane because then she explains that, Simon runs out. Simon freaks out, and she tries to explain to him, listen, Simon is the one that's crazy.
Yeah.
Simon has been crazy since Tony disappeared.
And she's basically coddling Simon this whole time to keep him from completely losing his shit.
She pretends to be Tony singing while he plays, which is what they did when they were young. Because she said the only thing that when he was younger used to calm him down was to do that, to pretend his brother was still alive. And then for a long time, she says he didn't do that. They didn't have to do that play acting thing.
Yeah.
But since Tony's come back around, they've had to start doing it again. She has to do it to appease him. Like, how do you get to the point where you're like, Auntie, I just need you to wear these robes, and I just need you to wear this mask, and can you kneel here? Right? I thought they were going to be like fucking or something.
There was a bit of that feeling. There's a lot of like incest vibe throughout this movie.
There's a part where he's drunk, and she goes into his room, and she starts to unbutton his shirt, and he wakes up and just starts laughing in her face, and she runs out embarrassed. And I do wonder if maybe at some point she tried something.
Oh, Simon, in a pretty cool little murder scene, kills his nurse aide who he's been sleeping with, and she wants to run away.
She figured out that he cut the brakes.
She wants to run away, and he's kind of softening her up like, yeah, we could just leave here and go live a life. And she's like, really, you mean it?
He lays her down on the bank of the river.
Right by some water, and
they're making out.
I need you now more than I ever did before.
I won't leave you, my darling, I promise.
I know you won't. I know you won't, my pretty.
And you don't see him shoving her in the water, but it looks really cool because he shoves his hand in that intense Oliver Reed acting job, and then you see his hand coming up out of the water with the camera under the water as though you're coming from the girl's expression who just drowned to death. And I thought it was a very easy thing to do, but I kind of like the touch. I kind of like the little trick. And I think it was a little bit stronger than simply watching her hold the girl down.
Absolutely. It was artistic. The way that he pushed her, and it doesn't actually make sense. A lot of time would have had to elapse. He couldn't just push her in right where he was, but he was still in the same position as though he had just, by the force of him touching her face, she was under the water and drowned.
That's always common in movies, though. People get knocked out a little too quick. People drown a little too quick. People
Strangling takes a lot.
Yeah, people get shot in the stomach and die instantly. It doesn't really work like that, but, we're used to seeing it. And we've also pretty much figured out what happened with Tony, with the real Tony, but fake Tony, he goes and realizes that these bricks, and he uncovers them by the organ, and he finds a dead body back there, and they know it's the real Tony. They know at that point that Simon actually killed the real Tony.
Simon comes in and says, now I have to kill you. And Auntie comes in and says, let me take care of this.
Now, granted, your body's going to go through some changes post-mortem in terms of decomposition, but the look of this corpse, it did not look like it used to be a 15-year-old boy. They definitely took this from a Hammer horror version of the Mummy or some shit. Or maybe one of the Draculas where he withers up or something. And yeah, I mean...
Or it was just a fucking prop because it had like a mummified face but skeleton legs. It was weird.
It's definitely used from another Hammer horror movie.
And it was tall.
But it's unsettling how obsessed with it Simon is.
Yes, so the aunt tells Simon, let me take care of this. And Simon leaves. Well, the aunt throws a lamp to catch the room on fire. Simon, and she's tied up Tony. He tied up Tony. So Tony's stuck. Eleanor comes in to try to save Tony. Simon comes in.
Fake Tony.
Oh, fake Tony. Simon comes in to save
dead Tony.
Real Tony.
Dead
Tony. He needs to save him, but he chokes on the smoke.
Yeah,
and he ends up passing out on top of the bones of his brother.
It's really sad. He's losing his shit and he's holding the corpse of his dead brother. He should have kissed it the way Eleanor and fake Tony kissed. He should have kissed it on the mouth. They burned to death, so...
Eleanor and fake Tony got out.
Fake Tony really got away with some fraud. I mean, he didn't go all the way with it, but he did just enough to maybe get in trouble. But with Simon dead and, everyone... Now he could just get married to Eleanor.
Well, Eleanor's going to get all the money and she's not going to press charges. Because the only people who could press charges are her and the aunt. And the aunt attempted murder, so she should go to jail.
Couldn't the aunt or the executor also press charges, considering they had to go through them to convince the story? It seems like a few people could press charges.
Well, the thing is, though, they didn't get to the point of writing him a check and him cashing anything. He was just there saying he was someone else. It is fraud, but they didn't do anything legally with him signing the name Tony.
His name's not on it.
He didn't ever say legally Tony Ashby on documents or checks or anything. So I think the lawyer could maybe find something, but at this point, the aunt tried to kill him, and you could say she killed Simon if you really wanted to, like negligence or whatever. So she doesn't have a leg to stand on as far as I'm concerned, because she could be in jail.
Sure.
If they're nice to her, they won't do that. But
the aunt knew that Tony was killed by Simon, right? She knew that, right?
The aunt is crazy.
They would have to prove that she knew that. She could just lie.
Because she walked in and told fake Tony, you just had to ruin it. You just had to go digging around and finding things that were never meant to be found.
Poor Simon burns to death. The best Oliver Reed role we saw all month. I couldn't get enough of him. It was just a treat, and just watching him act like a psycho brat.
When he looks out the window and sees fake Tony and Eleanor arriving in a taxi after he thought surely he had murdered them, the way he turns and grabs the curtain.
It's great.
Like he just looks like he's going to explode.
It's very theatrical. It's so I love it. Yeah, I love it. There's some actors can get away with overdoing it. And Oliver Reed, I like a little overdoing it with Oliver Reed. And that's Paranoiac, psychological thriller horror with some real jump scares and real creepy vibes.
Yeah.
And some corpse cuddling and brother fucking going on. So we're going to give this 1 through 5 each, combined for best out of 10. I'm going to give Paranoiac 3.75.
Ooh, I'm a 3.5.
Take a peek, folks. Paranoiac hits at a 7.25. It's in between the movies The Goonies and National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1. It's at least as good as those movies, if not better. We would probably say it's better than those just because it's more in our wheelhouse. So tomorrow we got a True Threat Thursday. I believe it is Zodiac, which is my favorite true crime feature film. And I think we got some Folks from Hell, the second Hellraiser on Friday. So I believe I got that right. There's a lot to schedule here. But check the show notes for links to other places to find us. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Have you seen Paranoiac? Always check the show notes. If I can find the movie online, and I often can, especially these older movies, I will put a link and you can go watch the movie yourself. So, and if you like Hitchcockian type stuff, classic crime movies, noir, thriller, psychological horror, I think Paranoiac is worth your time.
Absolutely.
That said,
Happy Halloween.